You're listening to the Travis Makes Money podcast presented by GoHighLevel.com. For a free 30-day trial of the best all-in-one digital marketing software tool on the planet, just go to GoHighLevel.com/Travis. Hey, what's going on, money makers? Welcome back to the Travis Makes Money podcast, where it's our mission to help you make more money. If you're new to the show, we release brand new conversations every single day of the week with unconventional money makers. So you might be listening to this maybe on another feed or a different podcast app or something like that. So if you haven't yet, please be sure to go to whatever podcast app you're listening to. Hit the subscribe button, hit the follow button. And while you're there, maybe leave us a quick rating and review because it is really, really helpful for us on the show. Today on the show, we're going to be talking about properties with my new friend, Dionne Payn. Dionne is the founder of Women for Homes, a company whose mission is to inspire 1 million women to invest $5,000 to end homelessness by 2030. She's over 10 years in the property industry. She's developed affordable housing projects, raised over $45 million for ethical property developments, and has helped over 40 investors achieve double-digit returns. She's also the author of the #1 Amazon best-selling book, Ethical Property Investing, and regularly writes and speaks about the topic. So if anybody's qualified to speak into property investing, especially as it relates to solving broader macroeconomic issues, it's Dionne Payn. So Dionne, thanks so much for joining me on the show.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Of course. Well, let me dive in with a quick money question here that I just love asking people because I like hearing the stories. Tell me about the first dollar that you ever made.
Good question. Sort of as a kid, I would have birthday money and Christmas money in that. But the first money that I ever made was at a paper round. So there was a shop down the bottom of the hill from where I lived. And I used to get the papers and deliver them. And sometimes I would walk, but the bag was heavy, I remember. I don't know how I did it. I also had a bike, so I rode my bike, but I wasn't very confident at bike riding. And there was one time that I was at this nursing home and it was down this steep hill and I just didn't put the brakes on in time and I hit the curb and went flying into the bushes and I stood up and turned around and everybody in the nursing home, it seemed, was in the windows just looking at me just like...
Don't worry, they forgot about it like 3 minutes later. You know what I mean?
Yeah, they were old.
Yeah, Jeopardy was on. There was something else to do. Okay, now tell me how you made your most recent dollar. So what do you do now, Dionne?
Okay, so at the moment, I wear a few different hats. So my original business that I started 4 years ago is high impact property investments, and I raise capital for property developers. And I brought a new client on recently, like within the last week or so, and we have our onboarding call on Monday. So that was my last dollar into my business.
Love it. That's awesome. So when you were coming out of, let's say, high school time and looking to do something with the rest of your life, did you imagine it was going to be property investing? How did you get into this?
Not at all. But you know what? The clues were there.
Okay.
I remember, because I grew up in the UK, I now live in Australia, and I remember we used to have I don't know, maybe it was something that my mum subscribed to, but there were always these properties that were at auction that you could pick up really cheaply. And I was fascinated by that. And I just kept thinking, I really want to do that. But life took me in a different direction at that point. I actually went to uni. I did a degree in pharmaceutical chemistry. So my path was going to be to work in the pharmaceutical industry until I got completely disillusioned by that and worked in natural products. And I ended up studying natural products and making medicines from natural products, which I absolutely loved. But when that's what brought me to Australia actually to do higher study in that area.
Oh, really? Okay. So let me clarify a couple of things. So you got into the pharmaceutical space. It sounds like rather quickly you were disillusioned by that industry. So how much did you actually spend time working in it, or did you figure that out like even while you were studying it?
No, I worked in it for a couple of years.
Okay.
So did the whole graduate thing. The beauty was that during my degree, I did a year placement, and that was actually at an agrochemical company. So I got to understand the techniques that I would be using, and I loved it. And I love being in the lab space, and I love that research aspect. But what I got disillusioned with in terms of the pharmaceutical industry was my first job was working for a large pharmaceutical company. And I remember just being there at Christmas, and I had a great team. I was working in a great team. But then one Christmas, we had this big, sort of get together, and it was, listening to somebody over the, sort of it wasn't Zoom back in those days, but it was the equivalent, and yeah, so listening to somebody talking about how the company was doing and all of that and saying thank you. And I just realized in that moment that he was saying thank you, but it kind of was a bit, I just felt like a small cog in a big machine, and I
Mm,
didn't feel particularly valued. And there were other things that were going on with that place of employment as well, where I just thought, yeah, if I wasn't here, they wouldn't notice me.
mm.
And I seem to have a need to be noticed.
Yeah, well, it's probably a good space to get out of anyway. The farm. I don't know. It's one of those. It's one of those things. It's like Western medicine is amazing, and there's a lot of really great things that we've learned, and probably some of it's really necessary, and it's probably helping some people. But man, is there just some egregiously evil things that happen inside of that space as well, that make it difficult to grapple with, from like even like a capitalism perspective. It's like, oh yeah, but also this is crazy. And even in the UK and Australia, they don't even allow pharmaceutical companies to advertise on television. Here in the States, I think New Zealand is the only other country where that's even legal. So
Oh, wow.
it's
Wow.
yeah, really, it's such a strange industry to me.
It's a very strange industry, and I mean that was probably my way of just going. I'm going to move into something that I feel more connected to,
Yeah.
and natural products was always something that was very strong in my family, particularly my nan. She
Okay.
gave me some other very strong, um, uh, you know, and I got a lot of my sort of money scripts from my nan, and they weren't necessarily helpful.
Yeah.
But also, but that was one thing that was really amazing, that she gave me this love of natural medicine. So it
Mm.
felt natural to me to study that and to aim to work in that. But
So
just going back to your point about the advertising on TV in Australia, thank goodness it doesn't happen. But I did read recently that the pharmaceutical industry in the US is up in arms and are pressing President Trump to impose tariffs because they're saying that our healthcare system is not working in their favor. So they can't make as much money out of Australia. So they want President Trump to impose tariffs. And I'm like, in what world is this
yeah,
even reasonable?
that sounds insane. Yeah, like the pharmaceutical industry needs more money. Like they're the ones that we're worried about. Like they're not making enough, really. Yeah.
Mm, mm,
Doesn't seem like that adds up to me at all.
not at
So good
all.
on you for leaving that space and then finding something that was a little bit more in line with your values. So you were able to stay in the lab then, at least. It just kind of moved into more natural products. So kind of more like nutraceuticals type space.
Yeah, well, actually, I did a few different things, but the last thing that I did before I stepped out of academia was to work on looking at sugarcane waste products as a source of natural medicines. And you were looking at all sorts of things like cancer and diabetes and other things like that. So I actually
Mm.
found medicines in sugarcane that could be used for diabetes, which sounds really counterintuitive. But when you realize that when we strip away all the goodness out of the sugarcane plant to just get the sugar, the refined sugar, we're throwing away all of this really amazing stuff that is nature has put into the sugarcane plant to keep us safe. So,
Sure.
as an example, there is a compound in sugarcane that has it's antibacterial and it prevents tooth decay. But when
No
you
way.
strip it out of the sugarcane plant and you just have the refined sugar, it's not there anymore. So you get tooth decay.
Yeah, it like promotes tooth decay.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Nature's like trying to combat itself, and then we just stripped it out.
That's right. Yeah.
That sounds like humans. That sounds like something we would do.
I know.
We're learning though. That's actually one of the things that I'm probably most excited about in terms of AI is the ubiquitous access to information that we'll have as it relates to health and nutrition. I think that's going to be pretty wild to see in the next. You know, we're still obviously very much in the infancy stages of this, but over the next decade, 2 decades, I think that's going to have a tremendous effect on each individual's access to knowledge and information about how their body and their genetics translate to what their ideal nutrition plan or diet should be in order to help prevent most forms of disease or treat forms of disease that are in the body naturally. So that's one of those areas I'm really excited to see continue to improve.
Yeah, cool. And what's interesting about AI though is, and I love AI and I think it has a lot of great potential. I actually saw something yesterday. Somebody that I subscribe to was talking about if we could get to a point where we're using clean energy to power the data centers, then AI has so much more capacity to expand, and we can do it in a way that's, that's not destroying the planet. And that's the kind of thing that is on everybody's mind at the moment, a lot of people's minds. But the thing with AI that I'm a little bit wary of is where it's getting that source data and the biases in that source data.
Mm.
So yesterday I was having a conversation with my daughter and she's going through something at the moment and she was looking online for some information and she got some information and she asked me about it and I was like, absolutely no way. And
Mm.
she's like, but why? I've done my research. And I'm like, well, no, you've looked on Google. And it's got the little AI generator. And so she's looked on Google to find something and she's just getting all of the same information that she thinks is research, but
Mm-hmm.
it's actually just providing one view because that's the biased way. So you have to actually look a bit deeper. And then I got to nerd out on, talking about scientific journals and stuff and where you should really be looking.
I'm sure she enjoyed that. Yeah.
I'm sure she didn't.
Man, that's why I like seeing other companies kind of pop up. And have you heard of Perplexity?
I have, yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Perplexity is one of the ones that I like a lot because it cites all the sources. So it allows you to kind of like go further into the research and see exactly where the information is coming from rather than just kind of giving you a response and you just accepting that as the truth. It'll be
Yeah.
like, here's a bunch of information about it. And then it cites each individual source and you can like go read further and be like, okay, well, this seems like it was just like an opinion post from somebody's blog. This isn't necessarily like a source of fact or truth. But I think it's just gonna, like I said, we're in the infancy stages. So I totally agree with you that these are some things that we need to be wary of, especially as it relates to the time that we're in right now. But I,
Yeah.
have hope that there'll just continue to be more and more programs and advances that are made in that space to solve some of these, core problems that we've been experiencing at the beginning stages. Okay, now to get back a little bit into your story. So nutraceuticals, you're kind of working in the nutrition space at this point. Where did properties come in? How did that transition happen?
Yeah, no, that was interesting. So I finished my PhD, and my first baby was on the way. And towards the end of my PhD, I was looking for postdoctoral positions. So that was, the next kind of career progression. And I was fully convinced that academia was going to be the path for me. Couple of things happened. I didn't find the postdoc position that I wanted. I had a couple of attempts, but it would have meant moving away from the area that I lived, and I love where I live in Australia. I'm still here. And the other thing was we had a Women in Science open day, and some of our female lecturers spoke, and they had external experts come and speak as well. And I remember my supervisor, who I just absolutely adored and really respected. And, she had an impressive CV, impressive resume. She'd worked at Harvard and, all of these really prestigious universities around the world and published heaps of papers. But she said, ladies, you've got to just make sure that you don't get in the trap of working, fulfilling your career and not looking after yourself financially. So in her situation, she didn't have any superannuation. I think you might call it an IRA, maybe a retirement
Yeah,
account.
IRA,
She
yeah, 401k, yeah.
yeah. She didn't have anything like that. She had a little bit of money, but not enough to be able to retire. And she was at the end of her career and she had some health issues and she was trapped in the role because she just didn't have the money to retire. So that was a real wake up call for
Wow.
me. And that sort of led to my disillusionment with academia, as well as the fact of realizing that the research that I really wanted to do, for the purity of the research, just wasn't ever going to be funded,
Mm.
and not for the sake of the research itself, but just coming back to that, if it doesn't have a pharmaceutical use, if the pharmaceutical companies can't get behind it, then it's not going to be funded. Um, so, all of those sort of challenges kind of came together, and I just thought, you know what, I'm going to have my daughter, and then we'll figure it out after that. So in that figuring it out, I was home with my daughter, and my son came 4 years later. We were on one income. My husband was working. He had a good management job, but we still couldn't afford to buy the property that we wanted on that one income. And I remember we tried, I'd started to learn a little bit about property and I knew some creative techniques. And we tried in a few different ways to appeal to the person that was selling the house to see if there was a way that we could make it work. And it just wasn't the right circumstance for her. So we didn't get that home. And I just remember feeling really angry, frustrated, disappointed that,
Mm.
this was my dream and yet I couldn't achieve it. And I just thought, you know what, I'm going to figure out this property game. Like I want to learn how to play this game so I can play it and I can win and I
Yeah.
can get the property that I want. So that was what really spurred me on to learning about property. We did a mentoring course. We did a joint venture. Through that mentoring course, we met somebody and we joint ventured with them. So we started off small, did a couple of small projects together. And they were renovations and subdivisions. So we had two houses on one block. We renovated them both. We split them down the middle and we put them on separate titles. That was some legal paperwork and then sold them separately. And that first deal, we walked away with $30,000, which was more money than I'd earned, in one chunk.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I was like, wow. So it was the combination of my own blood, sweat, and tears being returned to me in a really tangible amount of money. And I was like, this is really cool. So from then I did more property deals. I did an affordable housing project, which again was a real, it was a turning point for me because I got to see that I could make money and I could also do something really meaningful in the community. So how that came home to me was that a friend of mine who had never thought that she would be able to afford to buy anything was able to buy one of these homes. Her dad passed away. She had a very small inheritance, but it was enough to get her deposit to purchase that property.
Wow.
And I actually saw her randomly the other day. I was recording my podcast and she was walking outside. She was like, "Hey, Dionne." And we chatted and she shared that she'd been in that house for 2017 was when she bought it.
Oh, wow.
2021, I think, was when she sold it, and she's moved to a bigger house in a different area again. So, and as she walked out of that, having almost doubled her money
Wow.
in that time,
Good for
and I
her.
was like, wow, that's transformative. That's awesome. I can do something that's really I feel good about because I've made money, and I feel good about because I've helped my community. So that for me was a game changer. And I just thought, I've got to be able to do this more and more. I've got to be able to scale this. And I did actually try to do it myself as the developer and crashed and burned. I was like, yeah, no, that's not going to work. But I found a developer who he was a great mentor for me. He helped me get out of property development, which was fantastic. But I ended up raising capital for him.
Okay,
And
cool.
I just said, look, I'm only going to do that if you're doing affordable, sustainable housing. And he was like, yeah, let's do it. And so he took a chance on me to be able to raise the capital for him.
That's awesome.
I took a chance on him, and it was the best thing ever. And that's when my company, High Impact Property Investments, was born.
That's awesome. There's so many pieces of this story that are so inspiring, Dionne, and I appreciate you for being willing to share. The resourcefulness is so underrated. The fact that you were like being at home with two small kids on a single income and still figuring out a path to be able to learn enough about property investing to pick up a couple houses and not lose money, but actually make money. There's a lot of risk involved there. Props to your husband as well for being a supportive partner during that, because I know that there's always interpersonal, interrelational dynamics that prevent a lot of people who have the vision from actually being able to see any of that come into fruition in their life. So there's so many pieces of this that needed to happen in order for you to be in the position that you're in now. But now you have Women for Homes, and your goal is to inspire 1 million women to invest $5,000 to end homelessness by 2030. Tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I will. I also want to say, just in the interest of transparency, the comment that you made about property development being risky, yes, it is. And yes, I have lost money. So I've made money and I've lost money. So I just want to share that because it's not all roses. And part of the reason that I lost money was that I just tried to get too big too soon.
Mm.
And that was a really painful experience. And, there was some depression, mental health issues involved sort of in the aftermath of that as well. But I still, I think that experience with the affordable housing just really stuck with me. And it was like, if I've done this once, I should be able to do this again. And it was bigger than like, because when you fail at something, or when I failed at something, at that thing, there was a lot of shame and a lot of like, oh gosh, what are people going to think of me? And I didn't think very well about
Embarrassment.
myself.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But the thing that kept spurring me on, it was just like there were some days that I was like, I don't know how this is going to work, but I know that I just need to put one foot in front of the other. And it was that experience with like housing is transformative. I've seen how transformative it is. I've got to be able to make this work that kept me going. So that, that was, that sort of phase was at 2018, 2019, I think that I was in that, look, I would call it a depression. I didn't see it as that at the time.
Yeah.
But I was definitely like, yeah, there's some really dark days and moments in that. But thankfully, just that putting one foot in front of the other
And you
and
stayed in
really
the
holding on
game.
to that intention has kind of got me to where I am now. And Women for Homes came from an experience that I had at the end of last year, which was I went to a personal branding and marketing retreat, which was it was so fun. It was like the lady is a photographer, so I knew that there were going to be, sort of professional photos, professional headshots, and I knew that I needed some. So I was like, yeah, I'll go to this. And there were 12 women there, and amazing food, beautiful property. It was such a lovely experience. And then by the time we got to have our personal branding photos done, we'd already bonded. It was like a big girly sleepover kind of thing, trying on different clothes, trying on makeup.
Love those. Those are the best. It's the best to go get around a bunch of people who are doing, crazy things too, and building real adult based human connection with others. And it's so good for the soul.
It was so good for the soul. And being in that environment, I kept getting asked, I'd talk about what I was doing, and the women there would say, wow, that's really fascinating. How could we be involved? And in my business, high impact property investments, there's a minimum investment for investors is $50,000. And I knew that that wasn't going to be accessible to a lot of the women in that group. So, it sort of stayed with me for a little while, and I just kept getting these messages of you need to go bigger. And I was like, I don't know that I can. I think that, my goals are pretty big at the moment. But then, sitting with that for a little while, I just got to, well, if I could make investing into housing more accessible by reducing the minimum entry, then we might actually have a chance of solving homelessness, because then it's an everybody problem that everybody can contribute to the solution, rather than us just going, you know what, we're going to leave it to the government, we're going to leave it to the developers. Because I tell you what, they're saying all the right things, but they're actually not motivated to do it. Developers can't, because it's just not feasible. It's not financially feasible for them, and they take so much risk. And I know I did it.
Mm-hmm.
They take so much risk, and they have to be rewarded for that.
Mm-hmm.
And the government, look, there's a couple of things. Number one, they need to have partnerships to be able to do this, because the government running a property development.
Ugh. Yeah. Just think of the line at the DMV and then think about the government trying to build a development, a housing development. Yeah, that would.
Yeah.
Yeah, too much waste. Too much waste.
Too much waste. Too much waste. And I can think of a number of examples where the government has been involved in different developments, particularly around. We had a flood about 3 years ago, and the temporary housing was more expensive than the actual housing that it was supposed to be replacing. So, the government aren't going to do it. And also, a lot of our politicians here in Australia are property investors, and they're just not going to kill the golden goose. So realistically, we cannot rely on developers and we cannot rely on government. What we need to do is to share that risk, so that everybody gets well rewarded. So when I look at this and I think, okay, well, if we can make it so that investors get rewarded well and they're able to achieve double-digit returns from what they're investing, if we make it that developers get paid well, but they're paid commensurate to the risk that they're taking. So if we can reduce that risk by bringing in philanthropic capital, which I have access to, then developers can still get paid well for the risk that they're taking, which is less.
Yeah.
We can use concessional capital, so we can use low-cost capital to be able to develop these properties. And then everybody wins because the end users, whether they be tenants or home buyers, have affordable homes. Yeah. So in my head, I'm like, this makes a lot of sense. And so now this is what we're doing. And when I mentioned before about how there were some really dark days for me and I didn't know how it was going to come together, I realized that I've just been working on this. So, I've got the piece over here with the philanthropic organization. I know the development route. We're bringing the investors together, and Women for Homes is that place of investors, but also I had to go back and look at what are the reasons that women are becoming homeless in the first place. And it all comes back to a lack of financial awareness that makes sense to them. So as an example, I'll give you an example about myself. So I had a conversation the other day with a superannuation expert, and she's really awesome. I've got a girl crush on her. But she knew right from the get-go, because she was in that industry, that she needed to top up her super so that when she took time out the workforce to have children, it would basically smooth out that gender pay gap that happens when women take time out of the workforce. So she showed a graph the other day that showed that because of the co-contributions that she was making, her super is actually higher than her husband's, and he's been working the whole time.
Wow.
And it's that kind of thing where when she first told me, I was like, why didn't anybody tell me that? And I consider myself to be, a smart woman, but there's definitely blind sides for me when it comes to finances.
As there is for everybody. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So I really wanted to create a place where women could learn about increasing their financial independence. And actually, when I think about it, I think everybody needs to increase their financial independence. However, there are some barriers that are specific to women that make me really motivated to lean the platform towards them. And then, when we've got financially independent women and financially empowered women, then we can change the world by ending homelessness. That's how I see it.
Love every piece of this, Dionne. I agree on so many levels. It's going to be from entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs are the problem solvers. It's the government's not going to come save you. And if they do, they're going to waste too much money trying to figure it out and then leave with a bigger problem than they entered the situation with. And so I appreciate the work that you're doing in the world in a multitude of ways. You're crushing it. Please continue to do so. Everybody listening, tuning in, you just heard from Dionne Payn. Dionne, I would love to move into the last segment here, and then we'll get you out of here.
Sure thing.
What profession other than your own do you think that it would have been fun to master?
That's easy. Medicine. I would love, when I've solved homelessness, I'm going to go into medicine.
All right. If you could sit on a park bench with somebody, past or present, and chat for an hour, who would it be?
Might be a bit controversial, but Barack Obama. I say controversial because it becomes political, but I'd really like to get inside his head.
That's fair. That's a fair one. How do you like to learn best? Books, audiobooks, blogs, podcasts, YouTube videos?
I like to listen to things. So I like to be, like washing up and listening to something. So it's either podcasts or audiobooks.
Got it. What, besides the Travis Makes Money podcast, of course, what's a good podcast that you would recommend?
Oh, the Financially Empowered Women podcast.
Financially Empowered Women podcast.
Yes, that's my podcast.
Got it. Got to go check that one out for sure. What is your go-to pump up song, Dionne?
My go-to
Pump up song.
pop-up song. Oh, I have a few. And I don't even know. Okay, so I'll tell you one where I do know the artist. The one from Hamilton, which is "I'm Not Throwing Away My Shot." That was my song that I had on repeat. That would just be like, okay, keep going, Dionne, keep going.
That's an anthem.
Yeah, that's my anthem. Yeah, and then another one is called "Shine On," and I don't know who the artist is, but I just love that song very much.
As we get everything wrapped up here, Dionne, where can people go to get more from you?
Sure thing. Well, they can visit my website, which is www.women4homes.com. And it's the number 4. So it's women4homes.com. They can follow me on LinkedIn. That's where I speak most. And just do a search for Dionne Payn, Dionnepayn.
And the Empowered Women podcast.
And the Financially Empowered Women podcast. Yes. And
Financially Empowered Women podcast, whatever podcast app you're listening to right now, grab out your phone, go check out some of the episodes that Dionne's putting out if you enjoyed our conversation here today. And then Women 4 Homes, and that's the number 4. So make sure you head over to women4homes.com. Check out some of the things that they got going on over there. Dionne, thanks so much for doing this. Everybody else listening, tune in. Remember, money only solves your money problems, but it is a little bit easier to solve the rest of your problems with some money in the bank. So let's solve that problem first here on the Travis Makes Money podcast. Thanks for tuning in. We'll catch you next time. Peace out.